It's the How to Write Funny podcast. This is Scott Dickers, talking today with literary agent Daniel Greenberg, who represents me, as well as a lot of other humor writers, comedians, and other authors. But he's really positioned himself over the years as one of the go-to guys for humor in book publishing. How is the book industry right now, the publishing industry, in terms of comedy? Is it a good time to be writing comedy books and selling them?
It's never been a bad time. There's always comedy books. There's always humor books on the bestseller list. There's always comedians writing books that are successful. There are now, over the last several years, it's been your Tumblr, your Twitter feed, your blog, your social media platform that is getting attention. So yes, there's never been a time. It's a very consistent publishing category.
That's great. And do you have to be famous? Do you have to have a huge following or be on TV in order to get a book published now more than before?
There's always been famous comedians, stand-up comics, people on TV shows, people, stars doing books. So that hasn't changed, that segment of humor and books. What has changed is that it used to be that if you had a funny idea and it made people laugh on the page and it had a great title and it was original and you had a fresh voice, whatever it was, this is maybe everything from some point of purchase gag humor book or a collection of essays, it would be taken seriously, and there was a market for unknowns that really just delivered on the page. That is harder and harder to do now because they really want to have seen you prove it online.
And when you say they, you mean publishers?
Publishers. So it's always risky to sign up an unknown. All book acquisitions are risky. There are famous comedians who do books that no one buys. But for the unknowns, they don't want you to be unknown anymore. There's so much funny, interesting stuff that comes from online that has become the minor league. So, 10,000 Twitter followers, 1 million Twitter followers, a Tumblr platform that's successful, something that's taking off. It's much easier to get publishers' attention if you are finding success, before books, then they'll sign you up for the book. Many of those don't work, they're not successful, but at least they're looking at it saying, look, 50,000 people look at this thing every week. We don't know if that means it's going to make a successful book, but it's working on some level. Let's try to make it work as a book, rather than we have no idea, no one knows who this person is.
And they're still thinking of it. When I say they, I mean the publishers are thinking of books as another vertical, sort of. Like, they're not necessarily looking to sell to the same people who are fans online. They're looking to broaden to people who notice the book in bookstores, for example.
That's what they want. Although if there are people who, they want to get the market of the people who are fans online as well. If someone has what they say, and sometimes it works, most of the time it doesn't, is, wow, this person has 700,000 Facebook fans. If we get 10% of those to buy the book, it's going to be a successful book by book publishing standards. Sometimes they get those 10%, and they also get a whole world of people who never knew about it before. Sometimes most of the people who are fans of the online thing feel like they get it all online, and they don't need to, there's nothing else that they want in book form. And it turns out, after they've done the book and it hasn't been successful, that it was meant to be a blog, or it was meant to be a Tumblr. There wasn't really a reason to turn it into a book. So a lot of this stuff you see in hindsight, but it's always a gamble.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that it often doesn't work. There's really no science to it. It's somebody with 700,000 Twitter followers. There's no guarantee. There's no pattern as to how that book is going to do. How much of a percentage of that fan base is going to actually buy?
It depends. Louis C.K. is going to have a wildly successful book. Everyone knows that.
Everyone just knows that fact.
Before. There are stars that people adore, and they are going to buy a book, particularly if it's something they've never heard in his stand-up act. That's another thing that publishers like to see is something that comes from from the voice of the comedian or the humorist or whatever they're doing, but is something wholly original and not something that they'll find in the comedian's act or online. But otherwise, you just don't know. There's no calculus that they can do where they look at Twitter followers or they read the sorts of reviews that these things are getting and say, this is going to translate into a successful book. You don't know until you have the book and you find the passion that people have for it, and you see if that translates into them actually going to a bookstore or going online and paying money for something. It's easy to like something or to follow something on Twitter. It's a whole other process to admire something so much to actually go to a bookstore and pay for it.
Yeah, but you're saying people who don't have any sort of online following, who just come up with a funny idea for a book and want to write it, you're saying there's still a market for those people? Publishers are taking them seriously?
No, I would say that has shrunk, that there's a minor league now, that your idea needs to be field tested online. And I understand what they're thinking. They're not starting from scratch. You have a proven idea. It's only proven online, doesn't mean it's going to translate, but it's getting some sort of traction. So that has in some ways replaced the just very funny idea.
So what about the novel? Like somebody with a great idea for a comic novel, for example, that may not have any precedent online, unless somebody's doing it serially or they have a blog and it's in their same voice. You're saying that's a huge factor. Nobody like a...
I would say fiction is its own thing.
Okay.
Fiction is... You don't need to have a following. If you have completed, it needs to be finished. So it's not like a humor book where you're writing a proposal. But if you have completed a manuscript and it is funny and it is cracking people up and it is moving and there's compelling and there are interesting characters and all the really, really hard things that all of these things have to come together for a novel to be successful. If you do that, you can be a nobody and you can sell your book. But that's fiction, and it's rare. Comic novels are rare. Successful comic novels are rare. But if you complete it, and I'm 100 pages in and I'm cracking up, I will want to sign that book up.
Great. So you've used the term successful or a successful book several times. I'm curious to know how you define that in publishing.
I'm going to steal, someone recently said to me, that's like asking, how long is a piece of string? Successful, it depends on what was expected of the book when the publisher acquired the book. If a publisher thinks something is very, very funny, but they know that the publication is going to be a challenge because no one knows this person or it's just a blog, and they pay a modest advance, which I would say is anywhere from $1,000 to $25,000. $25,000 is great money, but for publishing, it's not a huge investment from a large publishing house. Then, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 copies is a success. Success is also measured by how it's been received. If you get great reviews, if people are talking about it and your talent has been recognized, and maybe you didn't make a killing for the publishing house, but you sold 5,000 copies, you should have an opportunity to write more books, and they could very well reinvest in you. Then again, if you are paid $75, $100, $300, $500,000, then the publisher is betting that you are going to sell 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 copies, And even if you get those good reviews, but the numbers are modest, and they look at their spreadsheets at the end of the publishing process, and they're very much in the red, then that's going to be seen as a disappointment. So it really depends on what their financial expectations were going into publishing the book. If you compare it to other media, like film grosses, or now TV numbers have come way down because there's so much different TV all over the place. We're not looking at network TV anymore. Newspaper numbers have come down, magazine numbers have come down, but not a lot of people go out and buy hardcover new releases. If you sell 7,500 copies in a week of your new nonfiction book, you can find yourself in the top 5 on the bestseller list in March. That changes in the fall, but that can be seen as very successful. Then, of course, they have to see how the next week does. If there were pre-orders, and everyone who is ever going to go out and buy the book pre-ordered the book, and you sell 7,500 copies, and the next week you sell 1,000 copies, and the next week you sell 300 copies, then that is not good. But in terms of getting on the bestseller list, the numbers, people are surprised by how few copies you need to sell to hit the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah, I often tell the story of how my first book, which was self-published, actually made the New York Times bestseller list, and I was hand-delivering it to stores in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It's crazy. That blew my mind.
I think we need to get it on the record. I've told the story. It's the story of my agenting career, but now talking to you, I need all the podcast listeners to know I represented Scott through his years at The Onion and beyond, and all of his books except for one, which has another, for strange reasons, I did not represent it. But the reason why is because I went to school in Madison. You were never a student in Madison. You lived in Madison, right?
I was technically a student, but I dropped out before it really counted.
So we were all huge, huge fans of Scott's cartoon, Jim's Journal, which we used to cut out and put on the refrigerator. And for those of you who don't know Jim's Journal, you should get online and check it out. Really brilliant line drawing cartoon where nothing really happens. It was sort of like the Seinfeld of the cartoon world. And you had regional success, right? It was in the Midwest and college newspapers. We loved it. And when I became an agent, I needed to find clients. And when you're doing that, you call professors that you had in college, you call people that you grew up with who are writing. And I called Scott, this is before email, and said, I love Jim's Journal. Would you be interested in doing a collection of Jim's Journal cartoons? And he said, well, I have a agent for that already, but I just bought The Onion. And I'm going to be relaunching The Onion, and we may need an agent for that. And when I was in Madison, it was not the media satire that it became. The Onion was a coupon clipping gag newspaper that really wasn't funny. That's what Scott bought and turned around. And so I said, I don't think I would know how to represent an Onion book. I don't, no thank you. But
yeah, your money was on Jim's Journal and not on The Onion.
And my girlfriend at the time worked at PC Magazine. This is 1995 or 6, and they had the internet. I'm sounding very old now, but
you knew somebody who had the internet.
Knew somebody who had Netscape. Yeah. And she said she had gone to Madison too. She said, "Didn't you have an opportunity to represent The Onion?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "We all watch it. We all look at it in the office at PC Magazine. It's really, really funny because The Onion was really one of the first destinations online. You were virtually the first one of the first online newspapers. So I went to her office and I read it and ran back to the phone and called you and said, I'm so sorry. I take back what I said. I would love to represent the Onion. And that first book that you guys ended up writing was Our Dumb Century, which became a huge classic humor book and a #1 New York Times bestseller, and really made me the humor book specialist that I am now. That book really launched my career.
That's great. I knew some of that story, but that was fun to hear a lot of those details that I didn't know.
My girlfriend now, she puts her hand out and she's like, pay up. I get some of that.
Tell us a little more about your history, how you got into being an agent in the first place, like before you cold called me. And I remember that call.
Yeah. I went to school in Madison. I was a liberal arts student. I was a history major. I was always a reader, but I didn't feel like I had to become an editor or work in publishing. I came back to New York City. I needed work, and I sent resumes out to all fields, publishing. Back then there was a music business, advertising. I needed entry-level work, and I got a job working in the Penguin Books subsidiary rights department, which is the department that sells off derivative rights connected to books, so translations, book club, audio, large print, everything. A lot of the money that the book makes that doesn't come from selling the book in bookstores. And so I found myself in publishing and worked there for a year, and then left, and then knew someone, Jim Levine, who was starting a literary agency. He was late 30s at that point and was making a life change. He came from academia, but had always loved books and loved book publishing, and he had started the agency, and he hired me as his assistant. And there was a business manager, Melissa Rowland, who's still with us. This is 1994 or 5, and he was just starting. He needed an assistant, and he said, but print up some business cards and you'll build this place with me. And he did science, big think ideas, the categories that he still does. And I did what I was interested in when I was in my 20s, which was humor and music and popular culture. And quickly started, with the help of the Onion and some other things, quickly started to put a client list together in those fields, in those areas, and I've been here 20 years. And I'm partners with Jim now. We have another partner here, Stephanie Roston, and kind of stumbled into it, but found that I had a taste for the editorial side of it and the deal-making side of it, and I had, fortunately, a good gut sense of what's commercially viable and what's interesting in the pop culture world. But I also do memoir and narrative nonfiction. I represent a lot of journalists, and I found a great place and I never left.
That's great. And you really have become the go-to humor guy, haven't you? Are there other big humor agents out there that are sort of like your competition, or are you...
Yes. There are other people that do it. I mean, there are other agents that do humor for sure. There are large talent agencies that represent their clients, and it's not all that I do. At any given year, humor may be half of what I represent in terms of new projects, but it's a core of my business, and I have carved out that territory, and now referrals come in from comics and humor writers and bloggers and from all over the place recommending me, and that's how that has I've continued to sell. So yeah, there are others, but I like it, and I do a lot of it.
What are some of your other big humor clients?
So we represent the Onion still, which is coming on many, many years, 20-ish years.
Yeah.
And stand-up comics like Patton Oswalt. I'm on the spot now. I'm going to forget people, which is going to be bad. But
quick, call somebody in the conference room.
Dimitri Martin, Patton Oswalt. We now very happily represent Nick Offerman, the Parks and Rec actor and regular actor whose first book was very, very successful. Simon Rich, who is a regular writer for The New Yorker and a TV writer, Larry Wilmore, who is now the talk show host that took Colbert's spot.
Yes.
Jill Soloway, who's also a Madison person who did a collection of essays with me many years ago, and now has Transparent, her TV show on Amazon, which is very successful, and she's going to be working on a new project. Tim and Eric, podcasters, Mark Maron, Scott Aukerman, and many other really awesome, Chuck Klosterman and the kind of music, pop culture writers, Rob Sheffield.
So it's a lot.
A lot. And there are others. And the agency does everything. So Jim is still doing those more serious nonfiction. My colleague Stephanie does fiction, commercial fiction, and we have other agents, Lindsay Edgecombe, Monica Vermont, Danielle Svetkov, Victoria Skurnick. We are probably about 15 of us total now at the agency.
And it is still, though, a small kind of boutique agency. It's obviously not a big established literary agency. It's new, but maybe it's getting more established. I'm curious if you can explain like what the difference is between your agency and like a lit agent at William Morris or CAA, who might, represent a huge star who does a book.
Right. We're still boutique. We're small. We're very much independent. But we are in the medium size. There are a lot of solo practitioners. There are people who do it out of their home offices and have a couple of clients. We are fully established and have a full subsidiary rights department, meaning international rights and foreign rights, and we go to all the international book fairs. So there are a handful of other agencies that are our size on the kind of small to medium size, and we definitely go up against large established agencies. William Morris and CAA are huge behemoth. LA, well, they're all over the place now, but talent agencies with very, very smart people, and the literary department, the book department gets fed all the great clients that those agencies represent. So we go up against them, and we also work with them. So I would say we're in the kind of in the medium to large size at this point, but it's a very small world. I can't give a number, but I would say, are there 50 to 100 active people making a living, a real living, being able to pay your rent or your mortgage, being literary agents, and most of them were in New York, but they're spread out.
Wow, that is smaller than I would have imagined.
But it's a small world.
I'm curious to know the process that you go through with a book. It'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about, like, let's say somebody has a blog and it's doing well and they want to write a book. They have a great idea for a book. What process do you recommend a person like that go through to prepare something for you to see and then to prepare something to show to a publisher?
It happens in different ways, but I'll just sort of play it out. You have a column or a blog or a Tumblr, or you write for a TV show, or you have a book idea and you're funny.
Yeah, or you have a stand-up act that's doing well or something.
It usually starts with a conversation. This is who I am, this is what I'm thinking about, these are the other books that I admire, I'd like to somehow figure out a way to get what I'm doing, my voice, into a book. And we will talk about that, and I'll hear the ideas, and I'll try to help them shape whatever they're doing outside of the book world into a viable, interesting, sellable book that they want to work on. So it usually starts with talking. And then the next step is some sort of presentation to a publishing house. And we're very hands-on when it comes to working on our proposals, because you want the introduction to a publishing house to be the best introduction that it could possibly be. So we take the time that we need to have all the back and forth and the editing and the shaping. Where one thing that we do at the agency is I won't be the only person that reads it, and that goes for all the other agents. If I have a humor book, if I'm working on a proposal, I'll print out many copies and give it to everybody in the office, from my partners down to interns, and say, is this funny? What needs to be changed? What should we be working on here? Is this the right title? But we'll work on a book proposal together. And usually that takes several drafts, but we'll get it just right. And that is, there's a bunch of sections that go into it, and it's actually on our website, what we look for in book proposals. But the basics is an overall pitch for what the book is, sort of a one-pager, information about the author, whatever platform you have, and however you are going to help sell the book, you clarify that in a proposal, and we work with you on that. An outline of what the bones of the book is going to be, the structure of the book, and some sort of sample material. And that's the book proposal. Now, if you are famous, use the Louis C.K. example, someone that I wish I represented, but I don't. I'm a huge fan. Louis C.K. says, Louis wants to do a book, and publishers just start to bid. So if you are very famous, or you have an online presence, which is huge, the more visible you are, the more fans you have, and if those fans have trickled into the publishing world, the less you have to do. I think it's always a good idea to think about the proposal, think about your idea, and hone it before you do a deal with the publishing house so everybody knows what they're getting. But if you are a famous person, you generally don't need to do that much to get publishers' interest. But for people who are not famous, you take that proposal and we identify the publisher or the publishers that would be the right house for you, and the editors who would be the right editor for you, and we take your material and we submit it to them. And next is usually a set of conversations with the editors, hopefully more than one. If we are sending it to multiple publishers, more than one of them are going to be interested, and the author comes to New York or is in New York and has a series of meetings with editors where they talk about the book. It goes both ways. You talk about what the book is going to be, and the publisher talks about how they would be the right publisher, or how they would tweak the concept, or how they think you're writing the wrong book. You should be writing this book. That happens in the publishers' meetings. Then we do a deal for you, and there's many different ways to close a deal, but sometimes it's going to the one place that the author thinks would be the right house. Sometimes it's getting multiple bids in and setting up an auction situation where they're bidding against each other. Sometimes it's what we call a round robin auction situation where they start low, and traditional auction where everyone starts by not showing their maximum bid and bid against each other until the final bid. And then there's the contract negotiation process where we negotiate your contract and make sure that you're protected. And we're often, the first reader of the material and your editorial person before the publisher, before the editor. So a lot of reading as the chapters come in, marking up the manuscript and working with you as you're writing it. Then the manuscript comes into the publishing house. Am I going way beyond your question here?
No, it's good. It's fascinating because as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing I have never gone through that process, and I've done a lot of books with you. My process has been totally different. I'm wondering if I'm just a freak client, or what's the deal there?
The Onion is, the Onion is a different thing.
Well, even with my non-Onion books, I've never gone through a process like that. I usually do a proposal myself, and I'll do a fake cover, or a proposed cover, and like a sample section of the book, and it might be like a 10 to 12 page PDF, and then the next thing I know, we've got an offer.
Right. And that happens. I took the example of someone starting with the hunch that they wanted to work on a book. But sometimes they're beyond that. They've done their research. They know what they want to do, and they send me their book proposal, and they say, I want you to sell this book that was closer to your experience. And sometimes I'll say, God, this is perfect. Let's do it. Let's submit it. Sometimes I'll say, I think this needs work. It depends on, what comes in. But it definitely happens that way too, where I get a proposal, I get something written down.
Well, that intrigues me because I'm wondering why you would even want to talk to somebody who kind of just has a general notion that they'd like to write a book. Like what motivates you to get into that?
I guess that's somebody with some established, that are semi-established.
I see.
So it's not just going to be, we have slush, which is what we call people who are just querying agents. And that may be your listeners. And I've signed up many people who have approached me that way.
Well, that is a wonderful and horrible word for that.
Yes. We go through that. I guess I was talking about people who have a following and are ready to, where odds are they will have something that publishers will be interested in. You're right. Somebody who is, hey, I'd like to write a humor book, going to be tougher, but doesn't mean they can't, get my attention and have a conversation with me.
Got it. So that begs the question, who needs an agent and why? Like, if it is somebody really famous like Louis C.K., it sounds like he could write his own ticket, he could do his own deal. I mean, he does that with his DVDs. And also the whole world of self-publishing now is that's got to be scary to the big publishing houses and to an agent like yourself, because a lot of people are just doing it themselves. So who needs one and why?
For a variety of reasons, I think it's wise to have a literary agent. I want to change it and not use Louis C.K. Let's use somebody else, because Louis C.K. is in a world of his own. But even established people who are successful will benefit from an agent brokering their deal. So an agent who is in regular contact with the publishers, who know what they're looking for and know what kind of money they pay, should be doing a good job of setting up an auction and getting the best deal that the market will bear for that book. So just from a deal-making part of it, I'm convinced that quality agents will get more than 15% more than an author who decides just to do it by themselves.
And 15% being the standard commission.
Standard commission. So, but then there's just the fact that you need an advocate going through the process. The publisher is not your partner in the same way that your agent is. And all those points that I explained before, writing the manuscript, negotiating the contract, thinking about marketing and promotion, pushing the publishing house to market the book aggressively and spending money on you. A lot of those come from, a lot of these things come from conversations that your agent has with your editor and your publishing house. So throughout the process, not just doing the deal, but all the way through a career, and not just one book, but Scott, you've done many books, The Onion has done many books. At a certain point in the first book, life of the first book, if you want to do more, I start thinking about what's going to be next and what's the timing, and should you stay with this publishing house and your editor has left? Is now the right time to leave? And you sold X amount of copies. Is this the right time to ask for a lot more money? Or is it reasonable to think that you should get the same amount of money? All these conversations are important, and good agents know how to have those conversations and give advice. As for the self-publishing, I think publishing houses and agents are aware, or should be very aware, that is the new reality. And Why can't somebody like Louis C.K., who's already done it, I'm sorry that I'm back to Louis C.K. as an example, who's already done it with the online video and concert tickets, why don't they just upload their book and make a lot more money per unit sold? Why do they need to just take a royalty? And what is an editor doing? And why do I need an agent to do that? Those are all really good questions. And agents should definitely be asking themselves, what is my role in this, in all of this, if an author can just go online? Publishing houses definitely should be asking that question. What's the value that they bring to publishing a book? If someone could just get a freelance editor, get a freelance cover artist, get an outside marketing person, and just put it up online.
And there's even a rubric now. People have a system for how you get on the New York Times bestseller list, and a lot of really sharp writers are sort of going through this process of getting a certain number of pre-sales through their email list and all this other sort of stuff to get on the list.
Yes, you can pre-order books so that books get released in the week that your book comes out, and you need to do it in the right way, but those books can be reported, the sales can be reported to the New York Times to get you enough to get you on the bestseller list. So I think that's a really good question. It's something that we talk about all the time, and it's something that we have a self-publishing person here at the agency, so that when we talk with when clients come in, clients with really big platforms, clients that would easily be able to get a deal with a traditional publishing house, we take them through that option as a viable possibility. You can self-publish this book, and you can make 50 to 70% of the profits rather than 15% of the net profits of the retail sale price and royalty, and a range of different royalties with publishing houses. The fact is, though, it hasn't diminished the value that publishing houses and agents bring to books. There still is print distribution. There still is a marketplace of readers who want print books. It's still a significant part of the marketplace. And doing that distribution on your own without a publishing house and trying to get them into independent bookstores and onto Amazon and into Barnes & Noble and the other chains is a full-time job plus, and you may not get them in there, and if they sell out of your book, you're not going to be able to reprint and get them. So for the print distribution part of it, publishing houses are very important.
Yeah, I think you told me that more people buy print books than online books, like print books and airport bookstores, stuff like that. That's still where most books are sold. Is that still accurate?
It depends on the kind of book. For certain categories like commercial fiction, ebooks outsell print books. And the numbers for print books on nonfiction books, I've seen it happen over the years, even with my humor books. The Onion is a different thing because they do illustrated books, but it can be 20-30% of sales can be ebooks for nonfiction books. The numbers seem to be plateauing. So I think there was a fear a while ago that ebooks was just going to completely devour print books, and we still may get to that point, but for now it seems to be, and I'm one of them. I read books on a Kindle and iPad, but I prefer print books. And so that's one thing that the publisher does. There's also just the curating, the editing, the marketing, the publicity, the things that publishing houses do to get a book ready for publication beyond distribution that seems to continue to work beyond what individual authors are able to do. 50 Shades of Grey is an example. The book was I don't know all of the details, but successful as a self-published book, but it wasn't until Random House and the full power of Bertelsmann got behind pushing the book that the book was really able to break out. So they still have the power to go beyond most of the time, not all the time, there are definitely success stories from individuals, but the odds are still long and tough, but your odds of finding success are going to be higher, I believe. I don't have all the data at my fingertips, but with a publishing house than if you go on your own. There's just so much that goes up on Amazon. It's really hard for people to find it. And what's being published by the houses is what's visible. There's also the publicity. So much comes into the New York Times that they have to make a decision. There may be some wonderful self-published books, but we can't go through all of them and make a decision. Occasionally they do, but 99% of the books that traditional media covers are going to be books that come from the publishing houses, just because there's a perception, not always true, that there's a quality that comes from the publishing houses that's not going to be in the self-publishing world. Well, these aren't fast rules.
Yeah, if not a quality, then certainly just a legitimacy, and I feel like is a big reason to go traditional.
There's a stamp of approval that comes from something coming in from Random House, or Schuster or HarperCollins. So, but you're foolish if you're ignoring self-publishing, if you're an agent or a publishing house or an author. It's definitely, there are millionaires out there who have found a way to reach their audience more often than not as fiction by self-publishing the book. Now, there are dangers looming. Barnes & Noble seems to have stabilized, but they're not healthy, as healthy as they used to be. There is a print audience, but if Barnes & Noble gets into trouble and Barnes & Noble closes a lot of stores and goes out of business, there's really going to be very few places to buy books. Amazon would really prefer things to be sold in ebook form. They're not huge. They sell print books, but they would rather do ebooks. So if Barnes & Noble goes out of business, which is not out of the question, that could change all of this. But for now, from what I've read recently, I think that they've stabilized.
Well, I'm like you. I prefer to read a print book. And, we just look at computers so much of the day. Like, why would we want to keep doing that? As much as people are decrying the loss of traditional publishing, when the organ was invented, they said, oh, that's the death of the piano. But we still have the piano. And I feel like we're always going to have print books, but it may be the mom and pop independent bookstore and the airport books. I always think of the airport bookstore as like the pinnacle, like the tip of the iceberg. It's a great point of purchase place for people who really need a book, and it's only the most legitimate, successful, major publishing house books that are going to end up in an airport bookstore. I remember the first time I saw one of my books in an airport bookstore, I knew I had made it.
Yeah.
It took a long time.
Yes, and they sell a lot of business books for all the business travelers, and I'm always in there shopping for books at the last minute. And it's a captive audience, and people need a book for their trip. I think the numbers have come down because of ebooks, and you can put 5 books on your Kindle at home and not have to worry about going into one of the airport bookstores, but it is a great place to buy books.
So budding writers who are getting started and want to do comedy often ask me, do I need an agent to sell a magazine article? Do you strictly deal in books, or do you do other things as well?
For the clients that I represent for books, I also work with them for magazines. So more often than not, they will come to me with a magazine idea, and I will make an introduction to a magazine editor that I've worked with before. So if a client has a Shouts and Murmurs idea, I will send it to the New Yorker and the Slate and some of the other online places that publish humor. There's really not a lot. And if a journalist client has an idea and they have an idea for Esquire or GQ, or these are the print ones, there's also a whole world of online magazines, I will call or email an editor and say, I represent this person, he has a great idea, and make an introduction. I generally don't make a submission to magazines in the same way that I submit book proposals to book publishers. It happens, but it's rare. I do have clients that have contracts with magazines, and I, more often than not, will negotiate those contracts. But usually it's part of my overall representation of my clients to help them in the magazine world.
Cool. So just more of an informal process, sounds like.
Usually that's the case.
What do you feel like are some of the better humor writers coming up right now that maybe people haven't heard of, that you're excited about, that might be about to break?
Oh, good question. Well, I'm going to tell you about one of our authors, and she's already broken out. Her book was huge, but I think she's absolutely a brilliant writer. Her name she's represented by my colleague, Monica Verma, and it's called Hyperbole and a Half. Ali Brosh is the author, and she's going to have another book coming out. I'm not exactly sure when. And she is somebody who started with a blog, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what the format was. And that's an example of people have such strong feelings for her writing that every time she said anything about her book, it'd be in the top 20 on Amazon. So it was immediately apparent that this was going to be one of those books that has the online fans that are definitely going to migrate over to the book. And she's hugely talented and funny, and a combination of funny and sad. And if you have not checked out her book, I would.
Cool. Dan Greenberg, comedy super agent. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the How to Write Funny podcast. For more, and for lots of other free fun stuff for comedy writers, visit howtowritefunny.com.